So if we think of the activities, for me, clearly I think there's an issue for you to want to activate this space. You want to be able to do a lot of different things here. And that actually just means a very plain, clean surface. And the richness comes from the millions of things you can do on that surface. But that's not enough. You do want other specific things and funky things, and you want the wow factor and so on. And it just feels common sense to me that, that we've got to be looking at that space where it is very reachable from everywhere, practical, obvious. You can get a car on there, you can get vehicle on there to kind of load things off and so on. You can deal with it practically. And we've got, we've got the crossing back here, and of course Kensington sits back there. And so for me, this is kind of just feels, sort of stating the obvious in a way, but I think it's fairly sound in that respect. And so you've got, you're famous for cheese, you've got other things. If we're going to get this artisan market, this is where you want to showcase it. And it could be, that you really have a really well marketed either Sunday morning or a Saturday morning market, and that you become really highly specialized for this, and you milk the media to build the hype on it, and that those shops stay open for if it's a Sunday or whatever, and you decide, is it Saturday, is it Sunday, and the butcher has some some bespoke bits here, but there's very strong messaging, go to the butchery, and there may be showcase bits out here from over the moon, but you can see where it is, and that if you had that, but you've got honey, you've got other things, so that's got to build, and fresh, vegetables and so on, but it's got to be the highest quality. It can't be just another market. It's got to be different, and you've got the quality to start with, and you want that reputation, and in fact, and so. That, ironically, needs the least physical and the most organizational. Okay, so the other thing that we've been hearing about comfort, there are all sorts of ideas about how, and people love being lazy, they're naturally lazy, and if you give them opportunities, they'll do all sorts of stuff, and you don't want it to go too far, but you've got to give some, some casual opportunities, and there's some wonderful examples, and this is lovely, but this actually is timber, and so you don't need a lot of it, and I'm thinking this is stuff which sits on the edges and so on, but you need things which evoke, they just look like fun, and therefore you'll just go and do it, and the kids will nag their dad to do it, and because he'll feel a bit uncomfortable, and they'll love embarrassing him, and so we think there are these sorts of opportunities which bring about that bit of fun. And so if this idea of getting people off the road, that there's sort of a joy to it. I think there's a real opportunity. You've got 4 schools here, to give them custodianship of this space for a month, one school. And you say that month, you go in, learn about the plants, look after the plants for us, but you've got to create a really cool graphic on the floor. And everybody's going to be told it's this school. And it better be good, because next month it's another school. And you amp up some competition and so on. And you can do, you can do the stuff in a way which doesn't damage, and which in the end can wash off. It's a very known sort of thing. But these are pictures that I actually took, and I just stood there. You've got to be careful not to take photographs of little kids, you get into trouble, and so you ask permission. But I just loved seeing the activity and the engagement, and just what this means to kids. And so you've also got a lot of preschool here, and how do you get them engaged? But I think starting with the schools is, I think, a great way Now, if you've got all these other messages, these kids are that's going to be part of the thing. They go there to do this fun stuff, but they're going to get all these other messages. So we've got to think clearly about what are those messages. A lot of it's about keeping our planet clean, in the future, and the sustainability stuff, and being kind to each other, and so on. And so, water features. Now, so there's, on the one hand, you can get all aesthetic and so on, and you've actually got a very good interpretation there. For me, it gets more interesting when it is sort of tangible, when there's a sort of a scale thing and there's a fun thing associated with it. Yes, you can, there's a bit of a stepping stone thing here, but this can also be quite sterile. It may be okay in that setting. It gets a little bit more interesting. But actually it gets sort of more interesting when there's more engagement, and you start seeing more fun things here. But where it sort of really starts interesting me is when it gets to this level. Yes. And sort of borderline pneumonia, and parents getting a bit edgy about it all, and didn't bring dry clothes and all of that. But on a hot day, at that level, what joy, does that bring? You don't actually need. You can use that hard space, because when that's not on, it's just a few things in the ground. And this is, happens. This happens around the world. I took this photograph in, I believe it was Montpellier in southwest France. But there's an example in Ellerslie in Auckland. There's an example, and then London's full of good examples. But I think part of the schools thing, or maybe at another level, get some project going where you reuse materials, and you've got to make some funky kind of installation, and let kids make it. And the more amateur, the better. And maybe it stays up there for a month. Maybe the school takes it away afterwards. But you don't need some whiz designer to do this. This is ingenuity, not high art. And can we kind of create the settings where you can sort of do some of it? All you need is a tap. Everything on this thing is just found material. There's nothing. Don't have to buy anything. You just got to think and do it and have fun. And then, and if it falls apart after a week, who cares? You take it away. But it's about the engagement and the fun. And I think even this is just too calculated. It's it's cool for what it is, but that's in a sort of a more elite setting. This is clever, and this would have to be manufactured. And I think as part of this, we should really be targeting your artisans, your welders and chippies, and your people here in the community, and challenge them to come and do some stuff. And for them to get clever and get get a little bit of competitiveness going, and see and get stuff which is quirky of you, because that's what people are interested in. Yes, clever idea. May have seen that in Tokyo as well, or maybe I've seen it in San Francisco, and I've certainly seen it in the magazines. So maybe it's so so that makes it bland. Do something which is kind of clearly sort of put together and quirky and local. People really respond to that because they're getting to you in a way. And so Ebony gave some of these photographs too. Ebony, was this guy having a pee?
Not entirely sure what's happening.
If it is, it's pretty impressive. But there's quite a high pressure thing happening there. But this one is pretty cool. It's an old bicycle which is wired with a hose pipe, and the water squirts out in every direction. And I'm told there's you've got some bike history. Yeah. And so that whole bicycle thing, and I love the dog's pretty uncertain about what's going on there. And, you know, how cool is that? You know, it's just like such a cool statement, isn't it?
There's a water play thing in Coromandel, and it's called Waterworks, and you ride the bike, and it creates like a shorter cannon, and you can turn the handlebars.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean,
And somebody dreamt it up, you know, and so this is a little bit of what you've just said. Ebony brought this one. This is these kids bike, and when you cycle, all these wheels turn. You know, put that in front of one of your welders, and challenge him or her, and a six-pack of beer may actually, you know, get a result. And you know, is there something fun? Some of these things you may just do, and they may be there as a temporary thing, you know, but some things may last. And so they're cool ideas. This is actually about graphics and so on, and murals. Climbing, the example's a bit sterile, but this is actually in Auckland, and it was done as a sort of an art installation, but specifically the kids could climb. Kids love climbing. And so I think there's a real opportunity, and I can tell you, I think it's in that situation, there's a real opportunity here to do something very strong and vertical, and something which kids can climb up, something where you can see the activity happening there, because that's the thing that's going to excite kids going past and wanting to turn off and do stuff. And that's got to have a real sculptural quality to it. And by the way, if you adapt it, it becomes your Christmas tree. You don't want a Christmas tree for 11 months of the year. You get sick of it. And you don't want to have one stored in a warehouse and then you've got to hire a big truck to bring it across. But if there's something where you add stuff onto any one of these, you add stuff onto it, and it in itself becomes that shape, or what, you know, at night. So, you know, and so I think for me, it just feels as though there's something very strong and vertical at that point. And that, by the way, has to be something where you can either get a selfie or somebody takes a photograph of you in it. It's got to be really blatantly, obviously that. Because as I said earlier today, you know, we are now so narcissistic that if you can't take a selfie, the place doesn't exist. And there are now a lot of tactical stuff where people are designing things because they just know you're going to go and do a selfie in there. And so, you know, what is that opportunity? So we need to think about that. When it comes to the edges, I think this particular one, I quite like that, and I think we've agreed that we've got to watch especially the edges with the heavy traffic, and so, you know, how are these edges and what happens around the periphery, and I sort of quite like this because it's got this kind of durability. It keeps people away from that traffic, but it's got this sort of micro green about it, and the timber is sort of highly you know, relevant to yourselves. But it feels like, you know, in this sort of area, there's got to be that kind of condition, but it's got to be benign. Yeah. And I think there is also opportunity within that for some sort of glazed thing. Don't you love this? This is a bicycle. This is a bicycle, sort of a table with, somebody said more tables. But this is one, and you cycle up and then you open up your Apple, if you're cool. Or you have, you know, you actually have your coffee there. And cycling is just increasingly going to become something, and it's just a novelty. You know, the practical value of it is modest, but you know, isn't that just kind of changing the paradigm a little bit? Now, once you show that to somebody, you'll come with 3 or 4 other ideas that are built on the quirkiness of this, and it will just go from there. And so, it's kind of clever, not smart. You know, smart in the sense of being elite. There are just hundreds of ways that you can use timber, and you can use timber relatively inexpensively. I love this one because all that is a curved metal beam. We don't even know. It could be just straight brackets welded together. It doesn't actually matter what it looks like. You can't see it. These are straight pieces of timber. They just happen to be spaced on the curve. So you get a really cool outcome from a very basic set of components just used in a clever way. And so, you don't have to do, the sort of more complex stuff. You can if you've got, the time or whatever. But you can actually do a lot with timber, which actually has some creativity to it, and without it, having huge budgets and huge costs. If you were to tell your story, or these narratives that we're talking about, and actually when a process like this happens, there's actually got to be a focus group that actually gathers and edits and writes those up like a script for a movie. So we're not going to do it here, and it'll be part of the delivery of this, which we're hoping is into the new year. And there'll be people appointed. But that story can then be articulated or manifest in a whole lot of different physical ways, which can be pretty cool in a sort of sculptural sense. You might know this. That's in Wellington, and you may not, but that's a stone option. This is really one of the best I've ever seen, but sadly, I think it doesn't exist anymore. Well, I'm pretty sure because it's the Dyslexia Foundation in Christchurch, and it got hurt in the earthquake. And I used to stay in a little sort of B&B just kind of next door for when working down there, and I'd see it quite a lot. And I've actually got a bit of interest in this for other family reasons. But isn't that just really cool? And challenge one of your guys to kind of because how do you set this up? How do you make that obviously a timber sort of base or whatever, and you work it through and then weld these together or whatever, or they laser cut, who knows? But so telling your story is one thing, but you can do it in sort of poetic ways physically too, and so that for me is kind of interesting. This one actually talks a little bit about the glass with laser cut stuff in. I think that's one as well. They're not good visual images, apologies. And so you want to do that, you can do that. You've got to watch costs and so on. But certainly I think at this end, it could be that that some of that sort of stuff happens where you may want some transparency coming through. But this is the photo opportunity. Building on the language thing, and we were talking earlier. Is this Jane and John? And if you took a photograph 20 years later, is it still Jane and John, or is it another combination? So maybe you've got to go this way. You get repeat visits because every time it's a new partnership, they've got to come back and retake the photograph. But again, it's this is just so calculated in setting up the opportunity for the photograph. You don't have to be a genius. That you walk past and you go, hang on, will this work? And I think that's part of the sort of spirit of what we've got to find some things in there that has that quality, and it links a little bit with the wow thing. And so I think for me, I think if it's the water bits, it could be that some of the water bits can be in there because you can turn them on, turn them off, and they actually work quite well in a big space. So those little fountains, and they may only happen at certain times or whatever. But I think if it's going to be water, it's really in that space for most parts. Now there can be funky little bits which sit, on the periphery, but you do want to keep the general space there as for the flexibility, for that activation, and for those sorts of things, all those wonderful things that you can do in the space. I think going right back, and we have actually, I've driven up and down with Sam from council about a month ago or so, and we found some spots where we thought may be good places to signal what's happening here, in both directions. And so we'll put some ideas forward for that. I think whatever that says has to speak of this, and it can't be a long sentence. It's got to be a sort of an arresting image of something that's happening there that kind of stimulates the possibility of you stopping. I think as you get closer, you need a bit of a reminder, and I think a simple sign which says something like, if you do that instead of, is this me? Sorry. If you do that instead of, okay, something's going nuts, that's probably me. And so if you, just a simple sign which is encouraging you to turn off here, which and there may be some clues here, but you can't leave it too late. We had some good ideas about gateways and stuff here, but you can't leave the decision for that last minute. You've got to be saying in advance, there's a sign up 2 blocks away which says, remember, to turn off there, and then that kind of repeats, but you've got to be very explicit. And maybe there's something from the other direction. When you get here, you need, obviously, something which kind of reminds people. But I think it's that outside signage, and we've got to think about those messages internally. In terms of going back now, I don't know, 18 months or more, really important with Over the Moon here, what kind of happens on that elevation. I think we got Neil Street over here. That elevation, how that is seen, and there'll be something about how this is seen coming from there. What is that message? The current sign's in the right place, but it's in the shade and you can't read it, so it doesn't help. It's in a reasonable place. And then I think there's something about Kensington and just how we can use Kensington on a flexible basis. And if we can find ways that when you have a market, because I think a really good program would be, if you've got an open space like this, and if that's a footpath, and if we can get use up to there, that's even better. And if that's a footpath, and if this is the middle of the street, that you, on a sort of a market basis, that you get stalls that sit here. They sit on the driver's lane, and they front onto the footpath. And so you're getting all of that movement down the footpath and into the space and across. So these stalls, and that means vehicles can still come and go, and you can still have some normality, and so you get a bit of functionality. You've only got one lane, and it doesn't even matter if it becomes two-way, just for that, the chaos actually helps a little bit. But I think it's an absolute dead ringer for a really cool market. And can you imagine, this is not blocking up shops, it's not interfering with business, it's sitting out here, and this is where the energy goes, and then of course that energy is going to spill up and down town. And so I can see a really cool, practical way of dealing with that, that just is win-win in that sense. I wouldn't go spending a lot of money changing the street too much. I'd rather you have some plant boxes that are movable if you want to block things off and so on. But don't go and spend your whole budget on making this a shared street or something, and then you've got nothing left to spend on the place. And that sort of... So what I'm seeking is, does this feel like the thinking, and from what you've heard, does this feel like like we're sort of collectively heading in a good direction.
What did you think about the idea of charging stations?
Of what, sorry?
Charging stations for electric cars.
Yeah, I think that's cool. You just, but you don't want to take that up right in the hot spot, but it may be something that just happens. You know, I think it's a really cool idea. You've got to look also just around town where those opportunities are. Of course, be nice to try and hook those people into here. Normally, people with electrical cars are a little bit smug, you know. So I don't know if you really want them here, but but I think, but you know, the bigger question is it right here? You know, it's not a bad thing if, you know, to get people here, but it may just be, you know, a little bit next door or not, or, you know, adjacent. But it doesn't take a huge amount, does it? It's not a big. It's almost like two parking spaces, and so to just do it, well, in that case, you know, if there's something here which you know is going to work with, not compete with the market, then you know, you'd consider it. Anybody else?
The point I'd like to raise is the fact that very soon the Waikato Expressway is going to be effectively bypassing all the towns from Auckland down to Te Rau.
Good
and
thinking.
the next stop on the road.
Yeah.
How do we stop that traffic coming south? This is all focused very much from south and westbound traffic, this water feature we've got now. But from the north, there's nothing to tell you that's what's coming.
Yeah, no, I love your thinking, and you're thinking big picture, which is fantastic. And so, for a start, the approaches have to be both. You know, that we've got to get the signalling on both, and I think what don't know if it'll work, but there may be an idea of you know, you definitely have to re-emphasize this opportunity. There could be you know, it may not work, but trying to encourage people to go off one street early so that they're coming down here. It may be wishful thinking, but if you pose the opportunity, it may work. But what you've got, I don't like roundabouts because they're not good for pedestrians. They're not good for cyclists. They kind of work, and everybody thinks it's fun, but actually, you know, that's why this thing is up here. You know, that's why these things are pushed away, because roundabouts are all about cars and nothing about people, and they actually do a lot of harm in the middle of town centre. But you have it. But the one positive that you've got is that you can legally, usefully, easily do a U-turn. And this little diagram that I showed about that, you need that same diagram, which kind of says here the route now you're coming from the north, and this says do this to get there. We know you're heading there, but do this to get there. You can give a graphic which signals that strongly. So I think that's a really good point, and you know, that'll be you want, you know, all of that excess Auckland money, you want to sort of get your diminish that on its way south.
Would it be great if we couldn't, like, if we could make them go almost opposite Wooden Farmer or in front of the street before countdown?
Turn right.
And then turn right there, and then you get them straight into
you're right,
and no parking on the state highway.
It would help this place, but what I do caution, just from a general town centre perspective, just that we don't undermine the shops on State Highway.
I don't mean that you need to make all the cars go there.
No.
If you sign there that parking space is,
Yeah.
if you want to go.
Well, and the way you do it is through P for parking and P for P, toilets. And because, you know, that's what's in people's minds. And so if you're giving messages up there, you know, if you turn right here and you're going to get parking, toilet, and you know, and some fun, and there's some sort of symbol which symbolizes this, and if people have missed that, they get the other signal which says do this. You know, you've just got to build in those messages, you know, in multiple terms.
But I think with the whole artesian idea, you don't just want to stop them for 10 minutes, you know, you want to stop them for a longer time.
Yeah.
So that's why if you make Tiro Street a non-parking area, so and maybe put some beautiful trees there, and then people can park at Kensington Street, and they will wander around town.
Yeah. I'm going to let you go early because you just said take all the parking out of Tiro Street, and for your own safety, I will let you leave early in case the others have heard you say that. But I think there's a balance there, but I think signalling strongly parking being available on Kensington, making a meal of that, you know, quite literally, because there'll be food too. But I think that is the big attraction, you know, that we can build on. We have to get a deal on that toilet though, because you don't actually have a public toilet. But I think that's really a common sense it's a conversation. We've got to respect the owners, and we've got to have a respectful conversation with the owners. Because it's in their interest if people are, if that attracts people into their property, they get more footfall, they definitely will get more, you know, purchases. And so that common sense says that shouldn't be a problem. What we are doing though, the permission we are asking is that we are publicly advertising it as a public toilet destination, and they're going to get the benefits of the footfall, so that shouldn't be a problem. But we've got to go through the right process. Folks, anything else?
Going back to that parking,
Yes.
could that be displayed on the sign outside PiP so that people are coming actually right into town and then getting the chance to turn around the roundabout, go past Van Dyke, you know, go on to Kensington,
Yeah.
instead of detouring them away down. Like,
I think that's worth looking at. That's worth, yeah.
Them out of there, then that's like whole street, not being
And also that the businesses in Tiro Street are being bypassed by going past downtown and they're losing
Yeah.
profit too, you see. So
Yeah.
you've got to think of the other businesses.
Absolutely. That's was my earlier point. Yeah. We're not really making bypasses, and don't hold your breath for the big one either. That will be post. That'll be after our time. Folks, can I thank you? That's been really cool. And you know, when you come into an evening like this from my side, you know, I hope to kind of go away with a cohesive set of ideas which aren't actually in conflict. There's a diversity of ideas, but I haven't heard. Just so often you get, no, don't do this, but you can do that, you know, or you know, or don't put a restaurant on it because it's going to compete with or this or that or the other. I'm not getting any of that, so I'm not. So that for me is a real positive. But the other positive is just how much you've enriched the conversation. So, from my parts, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple of comments before we get this. We've got all your names tonight, right? So we're going to set up a system of people who've got to spend half an hour at that restaurant crossing, just walking back and forth to stop the traffic. That's how we're going to work. But yeah, there's some exciting things happening. But what we've got to think about is what's going to be like in 10 years' time. What's it going to be like? So I think, you know, but what tonight has done is brought us all together with a common theme. And so I want you to put together, this guy has been absolutely brilliant. Very good.